The disappearing Louisiana coast is a multi-pronged threat that the people of Louisiana are fighting. This WYES podcast looks into how the scope of coastal loss was recognized, who began sounding alarms, and then started developing a strategy to save the coast and a way of life. The Louisiana coast is changing, slipping away to erosion, subsidence, sea level rise. Decades ago, the threat was recognized and a focus on saving the coast evolved. In this podcast, we'll remember those who sounded the early warnings and began the battle to save our coast. Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh, WYES Community Projects producer. Thanks for joining us as we continue our podcast, Early Warnings, about the beginnings of the fight to save the disappearing Louisiana coast. In this episode, we're going to look into what has been accomplished in the ongoing effort to protect and restore the Louisiana coast and what still remains to be done. Joining me are Steve Mathies, a coastal consultant with STANTEC, who is also our co-producer and host of our podcast, and he's also held leadership roles with coastal restoration agencies. Bren Haase, who is the director of the Barataria-Terrebonne National Estuary Program. He's formerly the executive director of the Louisiana Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. Mark Davis, director of the Tulane Center for Environmental Law and also the Institute on Water Resources Law and Policy. He helped establish and move forward the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana, former executive director there. And Steve Cochran, who as a coastal advocate has worked at the international, federal, and state level, as well as with the Environmental Defense Fund, and he continues to focus on the challenge of coastal loss, working through Restore, which is a coalition of national and local coastal advocacy groups. All right, guys, thanks a lot for being here. Look forward to a good conversation. Okay, Steve, let me start off with you. And throughout this podcast series, you know, we've sort of taken it from the beginning of the organized coastal restoration effort, talking about key people who are very involved with it at the ground floor level, and you're one of them. The groups that were started early on, the civic groups that have helped propel the restoration effort. So, you know, we're talking several decades now of how we've been focused on this, putting a lot of money into restoring the coast. On this episode, we're talking about what's been accomplished. In your view, what do you think's been accomplished? Well,
I mean, we've actually accomplished a lot with projects, but I think more importantly, the idea that Louisiana has developed this comprehensive management plan that is really recognized as the best in the world, okay? And the fact that the rest of the world looks to Louisiana if you're talking about a coastal restoration or coastal resiliency solution, and how do we do it? So I think for Louisiana, for us to be acknowledged globally from that perspective, I think is really, really important. I think that probably of all the discussions, in the previous discussions, we were looking back and we were saying, how did we get to where we are today? And these guys here were, you know, have driven a lot of that success, as have the other speakers. But I think we're really at an interesting point today, kind of thinking about where do we go in the future, because we haven't accomplished the mission. Way back when, we were naive enough to think 30 years ago that we could save the coast and we could do it, you know, for $50 million or whatever. It was going to, you know, no problem. We could get that done in a couple of years. We realized that that's not the case. But for us to continue to live in coastal Louisiana, for us to be here, for us to share it with future generations, we've really got to take aggressive action. And we've got to figure out how to get it right. And so I think today's discussion about not just where we've been, but where do we need to go in the future and how do we get there, I think is going to be a really important discussion.
It is. Just about any discussion about the coast is a really important discussion because it means so much to us all. Bren, let's go on over to you because you now are the director of Barataria-Terrebonne National Estuary Program, and we've heard about it from Steve in some of our previous episodes. I know you're still the organization is a very engaged organization and it works very closely with community members. That's a big part of your strategy and your structure. So In that capacity, in the role of, being with BTNEP, but also your previous role as being with the Louisiana Protection and Restoration Authority, what have we done? What have we been able to accomplish over the past 15 or 20 years? Are we building land? Are the projects working? Are people still involved in working to save the coast?
Yeah, Marcia, I think more people are involved today than ever have been in this issue and trying to help solve this, existential problem for coastal Louisiana. I think, from where we've been to where we are now, I think, we've gone really from a program that was essentially throwing darts at the map in terms of an approach for what we need to restore, what we need to protect, where we think folks can live, to a process that is world-renowned, as Steve just mentioned, for evaluating our approach to doing those things, right? Rather than throwing darts at the map, there's a very systematic, analytical, science-based approach to making wise investments in our coast and the coastal master plan that's been developed at CPRA. And so you've gone from that kind of scattergun, almost random approach, random acts of restoration, random acts of protection, as some people have said, to a very systematic approach. And you've gone from what was really small-scale projects that might be on the order of a few $1 million to large-scale projects that are really right-sized, if in my opinion, to address the scale of the issue facing coastal Louisiana.
Can you describe some of the projects that we've been involved in? What are they doing? Land being built, barrier islands being brought back, that type of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you just look in recent history, the projects that the state has constructed, if you look at almost any category of project, barrier island restoration, the largest of those projects is under design right now, the Chandler Island Restoration Project. Marsh Creation Project, the Lakeborne Marsh Creation Project, largest project of that kind ever built in the history of the restoration program in Louisiana. Same thing for ridge restoration, for example. The Spanish Pass Marsh and Ridge Restoration Project, the largest one of those ever built. Freshwater diversions, the Marpaw diversion. You look at risk reduction projects that are being built, West Shore, Lake Pontchartrain, Morganza of the Gulf. Those are some of the largest projects, not only in the state's history, but in the United States history in terms of restoration and protection for the coast. And that's coming from a place where we were building wooden fences along the Intercoastal Waterway for shoreline protection projects, literally, 30 years ago. So it's been quite an evolution over the last few decades.
Big projects and big price tags too.
That's true.
Always a challenge in finding, and definitely in finding the money.
Yeah.
You said you think that there is, because in your role now over at BTNEP, community participation and community engagement. You still see that's happening?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. I know we had a management conference meeting, which is sort of BTNEP specific, but it's for the entire estuary, the Barataria-Terrebonne estuary. One of the more well-attended meetings we've had in past years. Just this past week we had that meeting, and part of that was actually we had CPRA come into our meeting and talk about their update to their master plan, the 2029 update. And so there's a lot of cross-pollination, if you will, among pollinization, if you will, among different entities that we're all involved in. It's still the same community. It's still I think, I don't want to speak for the other panelists, but I think we still want to answer the basic questions. How do we save as much of South Louisiana as we have, and how do we make it as easy as possible for us to continue to live in this space?
Have we gained land? All these projects, have they been fruitful?
Well, in my opinion, yes, they have been fruitful. If you look at the map post-Hurricane Ida, for example, while there was a tremendous amount of loss that occurred sort of immediately and overnight as it relates to Ida, if you look at the projects that were built, Little Lake Restoration Project, for example, that was literally under the eye of the storm, it's still there. A lot of the land around it, unfortunately, is not there, but it really is, it's picture proof that the projects that we're building can be resilient and can last. We just need to do more of them and make them bigger.
We've heard with this whole restoration effort, the phrase, we're losing, a football field every hour, and then maybe it was shortened to every 45 minutes or something. And Don Davis was one of our panelists in one of our earlier episodes, and he's the one who says he coined that phrase. whoever coined it, it caught on.
Sounds like a Don did. Did he tell you whether it was Canadian or U.S.?
No, they didn't explain that. But at any rate, we still hear it, you know, well, you know, and it certainly did give people perspective. Right. You know, they could sort of associate that football field and how much was being lost. So in terms of that, Steve, in all of your work over the years, what has been accomplished to mitigate that loss?
So on that football field, whatever, actually the losing the football field we've gotten more time added to that now. It used to be 40 minutes, and then that got up to an hour, and I don't know if it's gone up since then, but we were actually gaining against the clock. We're still losing land, right?
Yeah.
But we're losing less of it, and that's the direction you want to go. You want to get that balancing thing. The scale issue that Bren really referred to in terms of the size of the projects, that really also gets to the use of the river. Because the river is, if you, generally speaking, when you have a problem, you want to understand its scale so that your solution can be the same scale, and that's where the river flows here, right? And that's the thing that we're having some struggle with right now is can we deploy that powerful source to our benefit in the process here? But we've been making. I mean, I want to say one other thing. I think one of the other things that's been produced, that's been built, is a legitimate sense of hope on the part of people that, in fact, as big as this problem or set of problems is, we could make progress against it. We actually could begin to do that, and because I think we've begun to show that's possible. As you know, we've talked about some of this. I'm worried about where we are right here today because of the challenges around some projects and the process that has been so successful so far at building projects and at building hope and belief in the future and at building credibility for ourselves so that when we ask people for money, we can get it, right? All of those things, I think all of those arrows, those directions have been really good. I'm worried about what's happened in the last few months about where we are right now, though. So,
Mark?
Well, I'm a lawyer. I don't build things. I try not to get in the way of building things. But I've been part of
you're an environmental lawyer. We get in the way of building things all the time.
But to me, the most important thing we've built is credibility. When we started this adventure in the late 80s, early 90s, nobody had done it. I mean, and quite frankly, it wasn't even in the job description of state government or any single federal agency. So the genius to this entire thing, if there is any, is that we've now made it someone's responsibility. And so, you couldn't fail before because it was nobody's job to try. But I think right now, where we are at the scale of planning and acting and even replanning, it's, things happen. I mean, storms happen, decisions get made, and even the best plan isn't necessarily the plan you end up implementing. But I'm personally convinced that the best metric of our success is the Deepwater Horizon, which should never have happened. But when it did, the fact that we had a plan and a broad coalition of stakeholders here and elsewhere who said, yeah, this is a good use for a lot of this money. I mean, all of that money was spoken for before. It had to be redirected to go into things like coastal restoration work here. That required essentially a vote of confidence by the American people via their representatives. That's not easy. And I think, and the technical integrity, but also the political transparency and, I guess, the nonpartisan nature of it here. Everything else is partisan in Louisiana, it seems, but this hasn't been. Whether it is now, it's a fair question, but every administration has to be, brought on board and educated about what their role is. But I think right now, the single biggest success we have is that the projects we've built, how we went from piecemeal, how we went from throwing darts, and quite frankly, the initial QIPRA plan, which was not a comprehensive plan. It was a list of projects that might be built, to where we are now, I think is remarkable. Remarkable won't be enough if we don't find a way to do it. And right now, the biggest failure is that I think I'm not sure we have the financial capacity or the political capital to carry the ball to the next, set of downs. But this is never going to end. We live in a dynamic river and a dynamic coast, and our job is to manage with nature instead of being managed by it.
You mentioned American people and the resolve and the desire of the American people to deal with our issue. Is that something that has been accomplished, do you think, in these past decades from when you guys started in your respective organizations and had concern and knowledge about coastal loss? You all knew about it, and those individuals who got involved in the groups, they knew about it. But it just really wasn't widespread because we weren't seeing it, particularly, even in Louisiana, here in the New Orleans area, we weren't seeing it, we weren't living it. Certainly around the country, they just really weren't understanding it. Are they understanding it better now? Are we understanding it better now?
Well, I would just jump in and say that you got to realize first that I don't think anybody else in the country realizes the magnitude of our problem. I mean, when they talk about wetland issues and their coastal issues, they're talking about smaller areas. In Louisiana, you can fly from the border of Mississippi to Texas and never fly across an area that's not a wetland, okay? So the magnitude of our coast is bigger than anyone can imagine, okay? The magnitude of our problem is bigger than anyone can imagine. But then what Bren said, also the size of the projects that we're building here, no one else in the country is attempting projects that large. Okay, so I think for us, there's a realization that, yes, we've been extremely successful, okay, in the projects that we've undertaken, the way we've accomplished them. And the rest of the country kind of looks at us sort of in awe, okay, in awe of what we've done. But then I think they're kind of wringing their hands and saying, yes, but we got the biggest problem, a problem that they would never want, a project scale that they can't even think about. So how do they respond to us? I go back to Mark's case that, it appears we have the biggest problem, we have the most detailed plan, well thought out, and we're accomplishing the biggest projects. So they kind of sort of believe, I would assume, now you guys can answer this for me that I don't know, I would assume that they sort of think we have it under control.
Well, control's not the term I might use, but I will, and it's not like every American knows this any more than I know the problems of everyone in Kansas or Minnesota. But I do know that there, people in the, like the ag business, increasingly are aware that the future of ag exports is dependent upon there being a South Louisiana to take goods. I do know when I talk to people who work in other estuaries across the United States, they could have competed with us for attention, but I think in fact, they joined with coastal Louisiana to create something called Restore America's Estuaries, basically realizing this shouldn't be a competition, it should be a collaboration. Those are the kinds of things that I think translates into decision support. I mean, I don't know if you remember this, Steve. Many years ago, this has been like 1991, something. You and I went to like a meeting of environmental groups, Clean Water Network, I think it was. At that time, again, nobody was doing this kind of work. And the belief that you could was assumed to be just a code word for mitigation banking. It's like, you can't restore wetlands. You can't do it. And we had to explain to people, you can't where you are, but we can and we must. Mm-hmm. And so the education within, constituencies, whether they be kind of industrial users, navigational users, or environmental, that has taken a generation to put together, and it won't stop. There has to be continued engagement with all those people. But I do think when the reputation that we've had for doing this better than anyone else, that's not just us saying it. I think there are people, from around the country, even around the planet, who are trying to figure out how they face their issues. And we're not the only place with a subsidence and a sea level rise problem. We just got to it a little bit earlier.
And we've been recognized for that.
we should have done it way earlier. I mean, the literature was there in the 1890s,
Yes,
but
that's true.
but you get to it when you do. But I think that right now, those are the kinds of things that I look to for the best signs of what we've built.
What we've accomplished, Steve? Do you have any thoughts on this?
I'm sort of in between here because I am caught up a bit in the moment that we're in, and I worry that it also might reflect a loss of momentum on our part, or even I can't tell you how many people who know I work in coastal stuff have said to me, "I thought this was all settled. I thought you guys were going forward, that the plan was in place, and that what's going on?" That sort of thing. So it's sort of almost a like I don't pay attention to that anymore comment because I didn't think I had to. I didn't have to worry about that anymore because that was getting fixed, right?
Right, in the master plan.
Right. And so people are now expressing the fact that what's going on, I don't understand, which means people really weren't keeping up much anymore because they did think it was kind of taken care of. Because
Maybe got a little complacent.
And I think that's a challenge for us at this point, is in terms of keeping the progress moving that we've had.
And
so far.
also, you talked on the Mississippi River. I mean, we have talked in this episode, in this podcast, about the need to reintroduce the Mississippi River. But what about the Mississippi River itself and research on the Mississippi River, of where it wants to go, the health of the Mississippi? How do we stand with that?
Bren, you want to go?
Sure. I mean, there are always questions, obviously, to be answered, and I will say that the Corps had recently embarked on a comprehensive study of the lower Mississippi River, and unfortunately, funding in this upcoming fiscal year was removed to continue that study. So that's a bit of a shame for somebody who lives on the banks of the Mississippi River, and probably for most of us that are listening to this podcast or living in the greater New Orleans area. That said, there's always, of course, research that's ongoing, but that was an opportunity, and it still is an opportunity, I believe, for a large-scale, again, comprehensive look, not just at what's happening from New Orleans south, but really from Cairo south along the Mississippi River and how we manage that river, which affects everything that happens in coastal Louisiana, of course.
So you say research is still going on, but this study that was put on pause, or just was it canceled? The Corps study?
The funding, it's paused.
It's paused.
It's paused, as far as I'm aware at this moment. The funding is not there to continue the study. So
Setback?
Let's sort of like my higher education career as a student is paused.
yeah,
It's been 30 years, and I'm not really probably going to go back. Odds are it won't be restarted, partly because the team is being disbanded, and we're losing information daily. We have fewer, U.S. Geological Survey, stations monitoring the river today than we did 20 years ago. There are new demands on the river every day. It's not the same river. The bottom is rising, the seas are rising, and there are more demands on water, which is what we need from it. And whether it's the water or even the integrity of the levee system along it. I mean, I really hope the world's largest data center produces the grandest benefits for Louisiana. But it's going to come at costs, and one of which is going to be water use and land use. And I do worry that we have no real capacity to make sure that as we suck water out of aquifers fed by the Mississippi River, that it won't affect the integrity of flood control projects and navigational projects. And that, as we know from just recent announcements, the Corps is going to be doing fewer inspections of the system. So I think, yes, we don't know enough about the basic resource that built this place. And it's also, is it too dirty to use? Well, it's going out into the environment anyway. The real question is, is it fit to use? I believe it is for most purposes, but I also think if it's not, let's make it cleaner. We have the capacity to do that, but at least Louisiana has never asked for a cleaner river. I think it needs to.
Okay, so we've made some headways here. We've definitely grown. We've grown awareness too. Not only grown some land, you know, fixed barrier islands. We've grown some awareness of our own people, awareness around the country, which is all good news. But we thought we really had, like you said, the plan, and we're seeing a little bit of changes in that now. We have concern about the Mississippi River. So how do we tackle all of this? I mean, what do we need to do to tell those folks, my grandchildren, the Gen Zers, that they're going to have a place to live in, that's a good, safe place to live in another 20, 30, 40, 50 years?
That's why we hired Bren to be head of BTNEP, isn't it?
Yeah, something like that. Something like that.
My kids always quote you.
Oh, do they? I think, well, it's a many-faceted question and a many-faceted, I think, answer. And at the risk of quoting Coach Saban, I think it's trust the process. And I don't mean to oversimplify that, because the process results in, it has, and it must result in outcomes. But again, I'll get back to kind of the way Steve opened things up. I think the process that we've set up in Louisiana is solid. It's a good process. It's been time tested now, dating back to 2007. We're continuing to build on it and improve on it even as we sit here today. And it's resulted in the kind of growth and benefits, I think, that we've all talked about here today. So trusting in that process, following through with it, and keeping it a pure process, if you will, I think is the way to go. I'd also maybe just take a minute to get back to something that Mark said earlier, and we were talking about kind of involvement and awareness. I think you have people today that are becoming aware of our coastal issues, maybe that never would have otherwise. People that maybe never would have, stepped out of the city limits in New Orleans, for example, or some other town in Louisiana, because of things like water supply, and the recent issues that we've had here on the Lower Mississippi River and Plaquemines, Jefferson and Orleans parishes, of course. Insurance. I mean, that is touching so many people now that it didn't, before, and I think there's a realization that insurance rates are changing because our coast is falling apart, and we got to do something about it if we want to, affect insurance rates. And there are other things across the coast, from a cane farmer trying to get water off of his fields that he was able to do with no problem, 10 years ago, and he's got to use pumps to do it now. To some of those bigger picture things like I mentioned, insurance and water supply. So that's bringing a whole new cohort of folks, I think, under the tent, and understanding that some of those things are changing as a result of our changing coast.
Meanwhile, with the master plan, and we learned of a big change to the master plan with the cancellation of the mid-Barataria sediment diversion, but the rest of the master plan is there. So by and large, in your familiarity with it, are most of these projects going forward that are part of the plan?
Yeah, so CPRA puts an annual plan out every year. It outlines the projects that they intend to build in the upcoming fiscal year, and it's actually a 3-year outlook. And yeah, there are a lot of projects in there, almost all of which are driven by the master plan to be built to help restore the coast and protect citizens as well.
So I'm assuming that you work closely with the state in your capacity as the director of BTNEP. Do you feel the state is really still committed to these coastal restoration projects? I mean, this is something that's very much a priority to the state.
I think the state is very much committed to some of the master plan projects. Yeah, not all of them, as obvious.
All of them.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so they are still there. What are your feelings?
Similar to Bren. I think that there's certainly some commitment to some of the master planning process, but I think whether or not Mid-Barataria was the right project, in fact, build is one question. Deciding how it's not and what to do instead is a more important one. And what worries me is the manner in which we decided not to do it. It was done very quietly, behind closed doors, subject to non-disclosure agreements. And quite frankly, the money can't be easily reprogrammed. By law, as we saw after Deepwater Horizon, that money can only be used for certain types of projects. I don't see those projects lined up. Also, those projects still require an environmental review, which can take a number of years. They weren't in the alternative suite necessarily. So I worry that we're making decisions based on factors that are not the ones we've traditionally used. And this is coming from a guy who I've helped kill other projects. I mean, I'm not just a build any project guy, because But how you do it and how you explain it, and then how you actually take responsibility for what happens next, that I think is going to be the real issue that we have to contend with. And I hope very much that the state finds a way to step up to the plate, but I'm not seeing it yet.
Because you bring up a good point too, and we haven't really discussed this with any kind of project. There are layers of approval and review and scientific study, et cetera. I mean, these just don't come up like, let's have a play in a garage or something like that. There's a lot that goes into it. That's all part of our process as well, right?
Very much so, and designed that way, so that people on the ground would be able to participate in it, would know what the proposals were, have a chance to comment on them in the way that the system can actually work that way. The science is vetted so that it is used. And the other part of this, which is a reason for positive outcomes, if we can make that happen, is that the process renews itself every year as well. There's a new annual plan every year. There's a complete new master plan redone, which is going back and looking at all the assumptions that were in place for the planning of the master plan. Are those still the same? Have they changed? Did this project operate the way we thought it was going to? We have to compensate for that because it didn't over here with it. All of that is built into the planning process, which is really very smart. It allows for the humanity of decision making to take place and for mistakes to occur but get fixed. If you let the process work, that's what it's intended to do. If you short circuit the process by saying we're not going to do those things, then you lose not only the integrity of the process, but likely the integrity of the outcome. That's what I think we're worried about now as we go forward.
Certainly to move forward, we need the money to move forward. DP funds, have helped us out certainly a great deal. What are we going to do beyond that? Where do we get the money? Any idea?
I don't know is the real answer. I don't know if any of us really know here. I mean, there, increased revenue sharing, of course, with energy production offshore has occurred here recently. It's still not enough. There's not, quite frankly, a lot of money being poured into this from the state itself. Most of the dollars that have come to the coastal program have been either federal dollars, or they've been federal dollars, or a result of the BP oil spill, as Mark mentioned earlier. So at some point, we've got to put our money where our mouth is and contribute to the solution financially, at scale, just like we were talking about earlier. But no, in my opinion, there's no silver bullet. There's no easy answer to that question.
So I think that's it. I mean, quite frankly, Louisiana is going to ultimately have to decide how to lead investment. And right now, we're not putting state dollars into this beyond the levels we historically have, which weren't all that much. But we're going to bear a disproportionate amount of the loss. So this isn't just a matter of, I don't like paying taxes, or I don't like government, to be in any kind of business. If we want to stay in business, we have to find a way to generate revenues that are going to attract other revenues. And I think that Deepwater Horizon is a great example, again, of how we use trust we had earned to get dollars we never wanted. You never want to get dollars the way we got them there. We'll never be paid enough to make up for what we lost. So, disaster cannot be a financing plan. So I do think we need to be thinking about what do we need to do and put together a realistic plan for raising the dollars. And if that means asking the people of Louisiana, to pay toward their own future, that has to be part of what's on the table.
So Mark, just out of curiosity, with thinking about, I know local governments are looking for sources of funding, and there's these lawsuits against oil and gas companies and stuff like that. Where do you see that going or fitting into the whole mix?
Well, it's interesting right now, and obviously it's, the courts are still looking at whether or not these cases should even go forward. But I want to be real clear on what these cases aren't. These are not cases against an industry. I know that there have been some spokespersons who say that, we invite an industry in, and then 20 years later we sue them. It's not what's happened. I mean, these are the lawsuits are only there because not only is it alleged, but there's apparently some evidence, according to the courts, that companies that agreed to do something haven't done it. And I will have to say that if I'm going to be asked to put up tax dollars, or I'm going to go to the rest of the country, and I find out there's somebody who actually might have owed money, I'd like to know that they have tried to recover that. Mm-hmm. It's not to penalize them. It's not because they're bad people. It's because they have a legal obligation to do something. That's what these cases are about. And you don't know who wins and who loses until the end of the case. But there's no question that, some of the companies that are involved in that litigation have made a lot of money doing business in Louisiana. And most of that money didn't stay in Louisiana. But if in the course of making that money, you made promises about how you would treat the landscape, the resources and people, and you didn't keep those promises, I think it's fair to call people on that.
This is our wrap-up episode of our podcast, which we called Early Warnings because we wanted to remember the efforts that were done, were made, when there really came into focus the realization that we have a problem here. We're losing the coast at a rapid rate, and we've got to do something about it. And also we wanted to recognize some of the people too, at least say their names. Many are not still with us right now, but they really did play important roles. And so I hope that we have done that because we want to thank them all and all the civic organizations too. So to wrap it up, just to get your thoughts on this whole coastal restoration effort, and what do you feel, how do you all feel about it? Are we indeed on a positive, progressive path? What really should we be thinking about as we continue to move along? Steve, go to you.
I think we've been on a remarkably positive path. The problem with the funding source that Mark mentioned is real. We've literally been able to take advantage of some horrible circumstances in order to have the money to be able to move forward. And we should always remember that, and I think honor that by keeping faith with that process that we created, keeping faith with that commitment to the future that is heart and soul of what this program is about. And when we start moving away from that process with things that aren't transparent, with things that limit the credibility of our ability to be successful here, that limit our ability to go to the federal government, which we will still need to do, and make the case for why they should give us more money. If we don't hold up our end of the bargain, if we don't do that, we don't deserve to get that money, and we dishonor the people whose lives lost in the first place. That's that we should be better than that. We can be better than that, but we're at an inflection point right now. It's something that we need to pay very, very close attention to and engage in so that we can make sure that we continue to make the progress that these guys have so contributed to. And I think that's where we are.
Bren, let me go over to you.
Yeah, I've heard folks speak of the coastal program kind of in terms of life stages, right? And so 30 years ago, perhaps it was, the coastal program was a child. We moved kind of into adolescence, and maybe are in what you would call kind of coming of age or young adulthood, I guess, at this point. And I don't know about you all as a young adult, I made some poor decisions. And so perhaps we're experiencing some of that now. But I think the foundation laid in childhood, adolescence, and even in our sort of young adulthood has been solid. And so I do have faith and confidence that moving forward into older adulthood, if you will, middle age, if you will, I think the coastal program is on good ground.
What about you, Mark?
Well, I wouldn't live here if I didn't think we had a shot at a pretty good future. And I don't think, when I look around, I don't see any place that has it figured out. Every place has their own set of fundamental challenges. So this is, in my view, a better place to live than it was, when I moved here. And I think we've built better institutions. But I think we do have, we have to reinvent ourselves in this process, partly because we were the only place that was facing this level of problem. Katrina hit here when before kind of the new generation of massive natural disasters. We're going to have to really earn our keep. And it's also going to mean that, quite frankly, we have to re-engage our congressional delegation. Traditionally, it was much, much more involved. And it's the great irony that we have perhaps more, political power based on position than we have ever had in my lifetime. But we're not using it, to the same advantage that, previous delegations, at a time when, quite frankly, bipartisanship was more possible. But that can't be an excuse for doing too little. I think we really have to find ways of engaging, all of our strengths and making an all Louisiana effort.
What about you? You're wrapping it up, Steve.
Well, and for me, it's obviously I'm very proud of everything that we've done in Coastal and the momentum that we built. I trust in the staff that is at CPRA, the same individuals that are there that work through all these plans. They're still there. They're still dedicated. There's all of us out here that know this is our home. And the only way that we survive is that we're successful. And I guess I kind of think, like Mark, maybe this is just a little blimp on the screen that maybe we'll all pull together here and pull in the same direction. And this issue that we have with Mid-Barataria is just one issue about one project, and that we haven't corrupted the whole process of the way we make decisions in Louisiana. So I'm very hopeful. I'm very trustful. I'm not. I'm going to be a Louisianian for the rest of my life. I grew up here, and no one. You have to realize how hard it must have been for Bren, an Auburn graduate, to have quoted Nick Saban. Okay, but we can all do that together. Okay, and so we can all kind of be in here and be on one team. And if we're not on one team about saving this coast, then I don't know how we explain that to future generations.
Indeed. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. Great conversation and wrapping up our podcast series
Thanks
about
for bringing
our
us
coast.
here to do this.
Oh,
Thank you, Marcia.
our pleasure.
Thanks.
And I hope we can continue to do projects like this to keep people informed about the progress we're making, what still needs to be done, certainly. And also, once again, I want to thank you guys for all of your efforts over the decades, what you've done to work for restoring the coast, and your
A lot of good people out there.
individual capacities and leaders of these groups. And Bren, certainly you're still at the helm there of one of them. So at BTNEP, which is doing really great work and
Thank you.
very, very involved with the community, which is so important, and getting that engagement and hearing. As Steve said, I don't know if it was this episode or another one, but BTNEP was about listening. It was about listening, and you certainly still do. So thank you guys very much. And of course, I want to thank you all for watching us. This wraps up our Early Warnings podcast, and we hope that we have offered you a better understanding of the challenges facing the Louisiana coast and how, because of the seriousness of the problem, if not an existential threat to coastal communities and culture, Louisiana residents and coastal engineers and professionals and state and local leaders have banded together to save the coast, undergirded by the science needed to tackle such a monumental problem. The work to save the Louisiana coast has been going on now for decades, beginning with those who sounded the early warnings. It will still be there for generations to come, and for the benefit of not just the state of Louisiana, but for the entire nation, it is a job worth doing. Thank you all for watching. You can find all episodes of Early Warnings on WYES YouTube and other sites where you get your podcasts. Go to WYES.org for more information.
All of the views and opinions expressed by the participants in this program are solely their current opinion and do not reflect those of WYES or its affiliated associations.